Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 11:45. If a couple people at the back of the room could just close over the doors to help isolate the noise from the hallway, that would be fantastic. Thank you. I'm sure you already saw that, but the lunches are available outside in the hallway. Looks like most of you have gotten your lunches. So with that, we will go ahead. This is the Working Group Chairs Forum at IETF 120. This is an official meeting of the IETF. The note well does apply. This is all of the processes and procedures by which the IETF operates. And as working group chairs, I am certain you are all familiar with it. If you haven't noticed, by the way, this set of slides is available as a template if you do wish to use it for your working group chairs. It's in the Meet Echo information when it says, preparing for, it may be other places as well, but when it says preparing for a session, this intro boilerplate slides are available if you want to take a look for those. Some additional things to consider. This is we want to create and maintain a positive environment for everybody that participates. We do not endorse any harassment. And as working group chairs in particular, it's our responsibility to ensure that we moderate our working groups so that they are in compliance with these rules. I'm not going to go through the meeting tips, but if you are new to the IETF and to the working group chair, you might want to review these so that you can remind your working groups of them. And then this is the final slide, which was resources. Also, all of you, I am quite certain, are familiar with. For this meeting, Rich will be using the notepad to take notes. Please feel free to help him out and add some additional notes in there. Don't ignore, but it is listed as EODIR because this falls under the EODIR program of work, but this is the notes for the Working Group Chairs Forum. With that, we have, this is our agenda for today. Is there any agenda bashing for this agenda? No? Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and introduce our two lawyers who are here to introduce themselves and to answer some of the questions we submitted in advance. And also, if you have any additional questions, they will be here as well. I've lost track of where they are in the room. Oh, there they are. You can come up here where everybody can sit up at the mic.
All right, hello everybody. Hopefully the audio is good. Good to see everyone. I'm Brad Biddle. This is my colleague Vigdis Bronder. We've been two of the lawyers for the IETF since 2017. Many of you probably knew George Contreras, who served as the legal counsel prior to us. And George still is connected with us, so we consult with him periodically. We also work with some folks from another law firm called Thompson Hine. David Wilson is litigation counsel for IETF, so he's also part of the legal team that supports the organization. And yeah, what we're thinking today, I mean, one of the main points was just to introduce ourselves and have the opportunity to get to know some of you who we don't know already. But we do have a couple of topics that have been requested of us, one of which was some input about the note well and how to present the note well. And then there are a couple of IPR related questions that we had received. So I think the way we were thinking of proceeding was that Vigdis can first just introduce herself a bit, and from there I think we'll shift to.
Hi, Brad, I'm sorry I had to interrupt, but it would help a lot if you got on access on the microphone. Just make sure it's pointing right at you.
Okay, sorry. Oh, I can hear it now. It's a lot better, isn't it? Okay. I won't start over though. So yeah, the way we're going to proceed is Vigdis will first just introduce herself, and then we're going to shift and talk a little bit about the note well. And then just after that, we'll respond to a couple of the questions we received in advance related to IPR, and then we're happy to answer any questions people have. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vigdis.
Try to make sure this works. Thank you, Brad. So I'm Vigdis Bronder, and I've been working at Biddle Law for the last 8 years or so. And so my background was in tech law, and very happy that Brad found me, and I've been exclusively devoted to the standard space since then. And so I'm glad to be here in person and see you all. So it seemed like one topic that people were really curious about was we stress the importance of presenting the note well in advance of meetings, and then exactly why and how should we go about that seemed to be a topic of interest. So rather than put together specific language to repeat verbatim, we thought that it was more important to take a little bit of a step back and better to look at the purpose of the note well, and then the purpose of the reminder of the note well, which is itself a reminder, and certain do's and don'ts, but curious for your feedback. So yeah, I think the first thing to remember is that the note well is really a reminder of the fact that the activity is part of the IETF and covered by IETF policies. The note well itself is not the policies. It's just a reminder and a helpful tool to find the various policies that apply. So I think it's important to make sure that when you're presenting the information, the first priority is to make sure people have time to look at it so that it's not a checkbox, but really an opportunity for people to be reminded that this is an IETF activity to which various policies and codes of conduct apply. So make sure they have enough time, and while it can be tempting because so many of these meetings do the same exact thing, don't dismiss the importance of what's contained on there. So while everybody is familiar, well, many people may be familiar, the purpose is really to remind people and to have that, make sure that people are aware of the various policies that apply. And we suggest giving a high-level summary, just like what Karen did right now, that the note well is a reminder on policies about conduct, privacy, and IPR, but not really getting into the meaning of anything. I think getting into the substance is outside of the scope of the note well, and outside of its intent. So I think encouraging people to read through the policies and make sure that they're familiar with them before participating is key. But again, the note well is a reminder, so just reading the note well itself is not going to give people the relevant information that they need to understand what applies to their activity. And then finally, because there's a lot of complexity in the various policies, we do encourage people to know exactly where they can direct questions, because we don't think that you guys should be responsible for answering the complex interpretation of the various policies. In case there might be some simple questions, but we encourage the reminder of the appropriate addressees for relevant questions that arise about the policies themselves. So either the executive director or the ombuds team, depending on the nature of the question. We're hoping that that's helpful, but given that this was something that came up, curious for any questions.
Yeah, maybe quick question about, you say give them enough time. How much is that enough time?
I think it goes to the fact of not dismissing it and doing it as a check mark. So giving presenting it and giving a reasonable opportunity to read through. So I think I haven't actually timed myself, but taking into effect that there's non-native speakers, just making sure that it's up there for long enough that people are able to actually read it. Because if you're presenting
the whole page, the whole note well, that
the
would
note
take a
well, I
long
mean,
time.
let's see, the note well itself is about 6, not the individual policies, but if you look at the content of the note well, I think there are about 6 bullets. So hopefully, and maybe having that up in an opportunity or as a reference so that people can read it is preferable. If we're going to show it, people should be able to read it. I think that's the point.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jim Fenton. Some of us, or in some sessions, we've been presenting a supplementary slide that's sometimes referred to as the note really well, that goes into more detail about anti-harassment procedures and stuff like that. That's kind of touched on in the note well, but this kind of helps to emphasize that. Do you encourage that? Has that been vetted by the legal team? And should we be doing that? Must we be doing that? All that sort of thing.
Yeah, I noticed it at this meeting. So I had not previously seen that. But I think that the nature of those particular slides really going to conduct and harassment, to me, it's a helpful supplement. I don't know that there's no like legal requirement to present it, but I think particularly if you think that will help get everybody in the right mindset for the meeting and a helpful reminder to sort of double down on being a good person, I see no problem with it. And potential upside.
Hi there, Jeff Oz. I'm one of the people that actually started this conversation. Sorry, I'm not in the room. The motivation I had for asking for the legal team to take a look at this was that we were having chairs of various sorts reading basically a blurb that they thought was a good summary for things, and in many cases just simply providing contrary advice to what's actually both out of the note well or inside the actual policies. What you've done here is, I think generally good advice, but the thing I was sort of hoping for us to get is like 2 or 3 sentences of this is what the chair should say that says, read this, statement, draw some conclusions from it, go from there, rather than have people make up stuff on their own that's wrong.
So I guess our point is that the note well is sort of intended to serve as a reminder of more complex policies, and it is intended, I think, to speak for itself. And really the reminder is that there are these policies out there. I think what gets us where we enter into a riskier part is to highlight, particularly when you look at the IP or privacy parts that aren't taken out of the note well, and you're sort of trying to extract certain what you deem most material aspects of that. That's where it gets risky. It's really on the participants it serves as a reminder that there are all these policies and that participants should be aware of them and have digested them before actively participating because they apply to their participation in the IETF. So I know it's not quite as crisp, but I also think there's a benefit to not having a rote text each time that people end up dismissing a little bit.
I understand, but by the same token, 3 sentences that basically says you need to read this. I'm not going to read it for you, and I'm not going to try to tell you what to look at is a flavor of what we're looking for, because what is happening is people are pulling random sentences out of things and providing the focus you're talking about. So this is the problem you're trying to address. I'm saying it's a problem. Thank you.
Hi. Could we just go back to the note well slide? Is that okay?
I don't know that I didn't put it on there. I should. Oh yeah, I have it. It's never far.
All right. This is better than it certainly was when I started, but that's still what I would consider to be a bad slide in a slide deck. It is difficult to read. We started this session and people didn't read it because we know it. It gets presented 6, 7 times a day for 5 days, every single meeting, and people don't read it. So I think that's part of what we were asking here is, can we make this any shorter? Can we make this simpler? Because it is not, I don't think it's doing what it needs to do.
Yeah,
As a slide.
Yeah, we were not well, go ahead.
Just an anecdote for me on this one is when I very first started working as counsel for the IETF, the Notewell slide came just in a series of emails. I was presented with the Notewell slide, and I just didn't really understand all of the history of this, and so I just jumped in and started editing it. And there was a huge allergic reaction, like, no, this is our text. So there was some significant pushback to changing the slide. So, that's really not been the ask of us is, could we do this better? I mean, if that's an ask, I think we could certainly consider that. And I agree there would be a way to potentially do it more crisply. But I think that wasn't really the question that was presented to us. So my sense has been that the Notewell slide is, there's the legal perspective on it, but there's a larger constituency that's beyond just the lawyers providing input on this.
I don't know that I can ask you with the authority of the IETF, but personally, I would prefer to give something a lot less in people's face, because nobody reads it. This is an end user license agreement type text to the people in the room. At least I don't believe people read it.
And I think that's at least part of the spirit of the dues is really that the opportunity for you to present it and say, read the policies to understand, don't rely on this because one, it has flaws of both. So, but essentially that it serves as this reminder that there are policies in effect is the core intent of it. And so taking the moment to have that reminder as opposed to focusing on the exact words. But again, I share Brad's sentiment that if there was appetite to revisit it, we would certainly love to take a stab at it.
Also, I just wanted to say your do's and don'ts are fantastic. I love it. That's really good. Thank you.
Russ Housley. I think of this as notice. All right. I think of this as a notice, right? It is reminding people of their responsibilities if they want to contribute. And it's in every slide deck for every session. So keeping it up there to read the reminder, I think, is a waste of time. They need to go chase all those links, not read those exact words. They need to read the policies behind those words. And they need to do that before they get here the first time.
Where's Chris?
Yeah, here remote. Christian, I agree with what others said that this is typically not being read. So if we want people to at least notice when this changes, it would be tremendously helpful if this had something like a version or like a last modified date, because people will not, this would be at least one incentive for people to read it ever so often when they notice, hey, this changed in the last month and I haven't noticed that it changed yet.
I'm not sure I heard everything in there, but this general sentiment of sort of whether or not people will read it in the context of the meeting or not, I think there's been a choice within the organization to have this Notewell, as Brad mentioned, it's been pretty core. And so I think if we're going to do it, then, and if that's part of the policies, then we need to be able to offer them opportunity to read it, or at least flag that it contains important information about the various policies that apply. And so that's the opportunity that you have by introducing it as part of the meeting. You get to categorize it. And that's why we wanted to make sure that you can categorize that in your own voice and not just by speaking words that a lawyer put together, because most people don't like saying that.
I think I infer from all this that we've had a problem where some people feel like they don't have enough time to read it, or I wasn't aware of my obligations, or whatever it is. Does that mean we should be reminding people on the lists before meetings, because they have plenty of time on their way here or before they leave to go through 8 bullets of policy. So is that the advice, that we should engage earlier?
Yeah, I think I would invite people to read it before. I think there are many different touch points where the note well is brought to people's attention. I think it helps bolster enforceability of all of that. And so your note well presentation at the beginning of the meeting is likely not the first time an IETF participant is seeing it, but it's a fail-safe. So
I worry that it might be, and the reason for that is when you're subscribing to the list, even if we present it, it's just like an end user license agreement. Yep, I agree. Yep, I just want to get to the thing. So it might benefit us to remind them.
yeah, I say benefit in there.
Darren Dukes. Hey, I love the note well that was up there. I've never actually gone through all those links and read this, even though I've been with this group for a very long time. So yeah, it obviously doesn't necessarily work to have it in the meetings, although the spirit of it is probably understood by most. We've got another QR code that I think probably everybody in here is scanned, either to get into the meeting, to raise their hand or whatever, to say they're on the blue sheets. As kind of that end user license agreement, it could be included in MeetEcho. You can click past it. You can get the opportunity to go to a link. You can even stick a little QR code in the bottom right. Folks could scan that and look at it on their devices, because they won't have time to read it and all the details in the meeting. Just a couple things, technical solutions to consider if the ideal is to get people to read it and to pay attention to it. So otherwise you have to go Google it or search for it somehow, and that may not happen.
Yeah.
All right.
No.
Thanks.
Michael Tuxen. My understanding is that the note well applies to all working group sessions and it's not specific to any working group. So there's no specific text in there. So why do we need to present this at every working group meeting? Can't we do this? I mean, every participant has registered, so can we do it somewhere else?
I mean, that's a process question that we can look into. We sort of came into the culture of the note well, as Brad mentioned, and it's something that has been preceded us. I don't think that we've ever flagged the need for the slide as like a pure legal requirement. So
I'm not arguing the slide at all. Not the slide, not the note well, just where does it need to be presented? I understand it needs to be presented once, but maybe not at every working group
I think
session.
this is probably a question for the IETF leadership as opposed to the.
Just saying
I have no idea
the
if
need
this is
to
the-
present
That
it
policy
at
comes
each.
from them.
Yeah, so I just want to be clear that like as IETF council, we never made it a legal mandate to do so. And so if we want to revisit the processes, then I concur with Karen that that's above us.
Okay, thank you.
So I have closed the queue. I am going to let the 2 people that joined after I closed it continue, but this is only there was a couple other questions people had. So if we want other topics, we should be quick.
Hi, Colin Perkins. The note well has disappeared from the screen again, but if you look at the note well slide, you will observe that it has the bullets of the note well text followed by a bunch of things about the IETF standards process. With my IRTF chair hat on, I would remind research group chairs that we have a different set of slides for the IRTF that don't have all the IETF specifics on them. So we have the same note well, but the text surrounding them is different. So if you're a research group chair, please make sure you present the right set of slides and not the ones that talk about the standards process.
Yeah.
This is Barry Liba. I'm responding to what Braun said and Brad's response to that. I used to be an area director, and when I was on the IESG, first of all, the IESG is who would make the request to you to edit this. We did that at the time with our previous council, and the goal was to make it a little shorter, and we wound up making it longer. That should not surprise anybody. I agree, nobody reads it. We do present it when you register, and at some level that ought to be enough, but the IESG at the time decided that it should be presented during as many times as possible. So during registration, during subscribing to mailing lists, during working group sessions. The current IESG might have a different view, and you might be able to work with the current IESG to actually shorten the text or lay it out differently or something like that. So, you know, there is a thought that it ought to be shorter, but nobody's managed to do it yet.
Thanks. This is Dhruv. My question was not so much on the Notewell itself, but where does it apply? So we are very clear that it applies in the working group sessions. It applies in side meeting because we say that. We ask side meeting organizers to describe it. Where there is a technically not a very clear understanding, even on the website, we clearly says that Notewell applies at any of the IETF context. I think I copied the text here, within the context of an IETF activity. And this part, I think our participants don't understand that well. And we don't even tell them, like, you know, what's happening in the hallway conversation is covered in Notewell. That part is sometimes lost. So we need to find a good way to get that across as well.
Yeah, I think that point taken. I think Brad will maybe speak to that a little bit, but I think the Notewell itself is just a reminder of the policies and exactly which policy, like how each policy has ramifications on various activities will also depend on the nature of the activity itself. And so, you know, the anti-harassment really applies anywhere within an IETF, no matter how informal the side meeting is, right? Whereas some patent disclosure obligations have a narrower scope as defined in the policy itself. So, but happy to dive into that and try to make that more clear if that's helpful.
Glendine, wearing my IETF Trust chair hat, I wanted to raise the issue that the Notewell does apply, as Dhruv mentioned, to side meetings. And I wanted to raise people's attention. I think we need to maybe get it better out there, that RSC 5378 also applies to all the materials submitted during side meetings. And those are IETF contributions according to the current policy set out in the Notewell and applied there. And I don't think we always do a great job of letting the people involved in the side meetings know about that fact. And I see Jay over there. It would be good if we could figure out how to do that better, is the point I wanted to raise, specifically for side meetings.
Thank you. So Jay Daly, IETF Executive Director. I will pick up on Murray's point, and in the welcome email for future meetings, I will put a thing in there reminding people to read the Notewell before the meeting starts, or generally I'll send that on the Saturday morning or something. So certainly I think that might be useful. There are a number of people from the IESG here, so I'm sure this will be a topic of discussion. And finally, just for Glenn, the IESG managed side meetings in some detail, so that's a discussion for them. Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Vigdis, and thank you everybody for the questions. There were two other kind of down in the weeds points that came out in some emails that were sent to us in advance of this. Are we okay timing-wise? Okay. One was related to if there's an IPR disclosure and then the party that made that disclosure appears to have abandoned their actual patent claim. Like, so they filed a patent claim and then abandoned it, and then they go radio silent. So there's no a working group chair or whoever asks, or let's say we go and we try to get some follow-on disclosure but never get it, and we're now left with a disclosure that exists in our database, and as a matter of practical understanding, we don't think there's any real risk of IP here, but we just have this disclosure sitting out there. What do we do? And I think there's some discretion built into the system where I think you as working group chairs and the ADs, and as we go through the process, I think you evaluate that. And just so if you like, maybe 2 points I would make is, one, there's an interesting RFC 6702 that talks about strategies for how to get disclosures. So I think my sense is this has been somewhat of a perennial problem, not the exact fact pattern I just described, but how do you get parties to update their disclosures? And there is some guidance on that or some suggestions in an informational RFC about how to elicit disclosures. But then if you look at actually in BCP 79, particularly section 7, there's some element of just judgment that, in a situation like that where pragmatically we understand there's no real risk of this, we can tell this is an abandoned disclosure or abandoned patent. I think you can just fold that into your analysis. So I don't know if that's clear, but I think we kind of do the right thing is the bottom line. So that's one point. The second point that came out in the questions was around what was characterized as boilerplate. So the way we do our patent disclosures, there's an opportunity for parties who are making a disclosure to either check a box, like I'm granting a license on royalty-free terms, I'm granting a license on reasonable and non-discriminatory, but potentially royalty-bearing terms, or I'm granting a license on these particular terms that I'm going to communicate in a text box. And in that case, there's some text that has been used frequently. I think Cisco perhaps pioneered it years ago, but there are a number of companies that use essentially the same text. And that text talks about if this document becomes an internet standard, then the company making the disclosure, will grant a license under particular conditions. And the question was, well, some things don't become technically an IETF standard. So shouldn't we collectively, the IETF, suggest different language for that text? And I think there was a response on the mailing list about this that I think was accurate, which is sort of we collectively, the IETF, are actually quite hands-off about what goes into that text box. So that's something that companies have developed a practice for what they put in. It's been effective over the years. It's something that we see a lot of, but it's not something that we prescribe in any way. So there's really no opportunity for us to kind of impose on companies. Or so this is another thing where like we could be doing it differently than we do it. The way the IETF does this is actually a bit unusual, that there's this kind of choose your own adventure aspect of our disclosure form. But given the way that it currently works, and given the success that we've had with it over the years, our general stance is we're hands off. Companies will do what they're going to do. And so, yeah, that we just live with that text the way it is. So I'll pause there. There's a lot of depth we could go into here, but let me pause and see what the questions are.
Kent Watson. Regarding RPR disclosures, you made a recommendation for the chairs to review and see if there's any that have been abandoned. I don't think the chairs are actually equipped to do that. To understand whether or not they've been abandoned, to navigate the U.S. Patent Office database, for instance. I recently learned that the IANA organization pre-reviews all the drafts language, and in essence, to understand whether or not there's going to be issues with what's being recommended for future reservations. I'm wondering if maybe a lawyer or somewhere else could also do something like that in the background, where they are reviewing the IPRs and figuring out if any have been abandoned and make recommendations to the chairs.
Yeah. I mean, in general, so the historic approach of the IETF has been we require these disclosures, and let's see, let me just think about the best way to answer this. It would be a pretty significant change for the IETF to try to assess the IPR landscape, so your idea would be, well, let me back up one more step. Who did you say was doing it that way? I'm curious.
I mentioned the IANA the
Okay.
International Authority Numbering Authority.
Is like proactively doing some kind of patent clearance?
They are, but I just use it as an example. I just use them as an example. The real point is and IPR is especially important at the time of adoption and again at the time of working group last call.
Yeah.
And so those checkpoints, it would be incredibly helpful for some background activity to occur that would scan, assess, and bring back information to the chairs.
Yeah, so what we get now is we get our disclosures. And so if there's something in a disclosure that's problematic, so either if a disclosure says we agree to license on royalty-free terms, we agree we'll license on RAND terms, or there's some text in there that I think there's a longstanding practice of the IETF to say if it meets certain criteria, we think everything's fine. And if there's something problematic in there, like somebody has indicated they have IP but said we're unwilling to license, then that's something of a red flag that gets addressed different ways. It doesn't always escalate to the lawyers. I think there's some practice among the IETF leadership for how to address those situations. There's like going back and asking for clarity, et cetera. So that's a pretty well-established process, I think, within the IETF to do that based on things that have actually been disclosed. Doing like proactive patent clearance to say like, oh, we really would like to know if this is adopted, are there going to be IP-related problems? That's almost impossible to do. It would be, so I think it's just not realistic as a practical matter to do proactive patent clearance. So my sense is pragmatically that we'll likely just continue to do what we've always done. And I think react when we see a problem, and that reaction can include looping us in, and we can help sort that out. But the proactive patent clearance, I think, just really wouldn't be feasible. And we can talk more about why that would be.
Hi, Colin Perkins. So you mentioned the standard templates that a bunch of companies use for the patent disclosures. One thing I would caution for research group chairs especially, we have at least one case I know where the authors applied one of those templates essentially on autopilot because it's the template they always use because of their company. And then it got published on the IRTF stream, and of course it is not a standard, and so the disclosure didn't perhaps have the effects they had in mind. So I would encourage the research group chairs, especially if you see people using those standard templates, which say, if this becomes a standard, we grant the following things. I would encourage the research group chairs to check with the authors that that actually is what they mean, because the IRTF doesn't publish standards.
Kathleen Moriarty, I just wanted to note that I have seen some disclosures that cover not only what you described from the Cisco example, but in the case of draft expiry, as well as while it's being worked on as an internet draft. So some do have provisions for each of those.
Hi, Pete Resnick. There's some really specific language in 2026 and later documents about we don't do patent analysis. And the reason we don't even want to get into this is the bad things in most of these cases happen to the participant who failed to disclose appropriately, not to the IETF. So if someone puts a declaration and it's long expired, assume that it's still in force. And you can go to leadership or go to the lawyers and say, perhaps someone would like to check with these folks because I think it's no longer being asserted, but they've made this claim. We decide based on that claim what to put in the document and move along. For us to get into whether the patent's valid, whether it actually applies to this particular document, I think is just a lunatic kind of errand to go on. So I think we want to stick to the current way that we approach this.
Robert Sparks, amplifying what Pete just said. Pete, if you're willing to point to the end documents that came after 2026, perhaps on the working group chairs list as a just succinct follow-up to the conversation we had here, I think it would be useful. like the note well has a bunch of references to documents that actually explain the details, knowing those documents, understanding what it is as a working group chair that you are and are not responsible for, requires reading all of the guidance that's been provided in the RFC series already. Don't just lean on the lore and the verbal advice that you've gotten from other working group chairs. Go read the advice that's in the RFCs.
Okay, thank you all very much. If you all have any further questions, you can send them to the mailing list or send them directly to Brad and Vigdis.
We also are doing office hours. We had a set of office hours earlier today, but we're doing it again tomorrow. I forget, do you recall our exact time? Afternoon tomorrow. It's on the agenda. So we would definitely welcome at 3 p.m. So 3 p.m. tomorrow, office hours would be great. If you have any questions, we're happy to meet with you.
We really appreciate you coming today.
How much time do I have? About 10 minutes. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Ali Rezaki. I'd like to share with you today some information about sustainability aspects of networking. It's great to be here, and thanks very much for the opportunity. Next slide, please. So, sustainability is a horizontal topic, much like security. It touches all IETF areas. There is now, this afternoon, a BOF on green metrics. So there are going to be sustainability-specific, let's say, focused actions within IETF. But we think that there are aspects of sustainability that touches every working group and research group in IETF and IRTF. Therefore, we want to bring this to your attention as leaders of the groups. There is a challenge, of course, that currently sustainability aspects are defined at quite high level, and translating them into actionable targets within each group is a challenge. And to face that challenge, we, of course, have to have the environment in mind, meaning that when we are working on energy or power, the idea at the end should be to have an impact, positive impact on the environment at the end. That's how we are going to get to desired outcomes for our investments. So the idea is to trigger thinking on what can be done concretely in each working group and research group. Next slide, please. So I want to start with this visual representation I drew to show you the complexity of sustainability, and that we have lots of feedback loops between the different elements that make up this sustainability landscape. It requires a systems level thinking at the end. You see that at the core, we are addressing the environmental aspects with climate change, mitigating climate change, but also adapting to climate change. There is resource depletion that can be handled through circularity or materials efficiency. Then there are some common aspects, renewable energy use, we have heard a lot, or companies reporting their sustainability impacts and their net zero pledges. And we have seen heard life cycle assessment or supply chain topics. Where do all these fit in our work in different groups? It's a key question. Then there is the relationship with social and economic aspects. And that sometimes makes a, let's say, really serious impact on anything we produce seeing the light of day. So we have to be mindful of this as well. Next slide, please. So given all this complexity, we took the liberty of singling out certain aspects we can suggest for attention in working and research groups. Obviously, the single biggest thing we can do and we are trying to do today is reducing energy consumption. But there are other things that will help translate that into environmental impact. And those are increasing the share of renewable energy used for our operations, managing the traffic load, the concept you heard probably, the rebound effect, Jevons paradox. So these are really critical that our investment in energy efficiency, energy consumption to be effective at the end. Because even though we can produce the most energy efficient solution, it can be wiped out very easily if that affordability translates into a disproportionate increase in the use of the service. Disproportionate, for example, to the number of subscribers. The subscriber base will increase, but if their portion, each user's portion of network resources or traffic increases disproportionately, then our energy savings will not keep up with that kind of distortion. So we really have to be mindful. And infrastructure expansion is critical. That needs to be challenged as well. How does it fare with, let's say, in the old days of multiplexing, congestion, QoS? These are all concepts with which we use to deal with limited resources, which somehow got forgotten. So should we remember those? Investing in circularity also is important in the sense of managing our manufacturing side emissions, but also our impact to natural resources or the longevity of our products. As I said, systems thinking and life cycle and standardization of metrics and following up on those metrics for a long time to see what impact we have. Next slide, please. So all of these is still at high level, so we have to really drill down to protocol design level, and each working group or research group would have specifics related to that, but in general, here are some hints. So we always talk about trade-offs. We talk about optimizations. The idea is to include environmental sustainability parameters in our optimization questions. So please think about environmental parameters, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, resource use, when you try to optimize your systems. So like performance versus resource use. Or, yep. So we like approaching things in a clean slate approach, but backwards compatibility ensures we reuse equipment. And we have seen the DIN-RG discussions, distributed versus centralized architectures, dedicated hardware use or cloudification. We heard data centers manage their resources a bit better than us. So what's the secret there? And also power energy proportionality is a key topic, and that relies on our behavior in protocols as well. Are we requesting always on services? Do we send keep alives all the time? Can we live without this always on parameter? And if we can, that's all the better. Next slide, please. And also, there are some challenges. We over-engineer sometimes. We include nice-to-have features. But also, we have to remember that we are in a supply chain. We have downstream, upstream, and we also are in an end-to-end chain, connecting to users and connecting to data centers or servers and linking them. And we can trigger, due to our actions, also consumption or environmental impacts on either end. So let's be mindful of that. Let's skip for the sake of time. So, no, previous, please. Yep, thank you. So a key target that's set for the ICT industry is halving its emissions by 2030. And we are nowhere near that target. We are going steady. It's not increasing, but it's not decreasing as well in a broad scale. So we have to do a lot better in terms of emissions reductions. So my ask is each working group could have an audit of where they stand and what are the low-hanging fruits, and take action. And on the IRTF side, I would say that if I were to single out a topic, it would be about limits. The biggest difficulty we have in sustainability is to create a causal link between our actions as protocol designers and environmental impact at the end. We don't know if our actions will lead to environmental change. And that, just because of that, the safe thing is to establish some limits around our actions. And what those limits should be is the key question, which I think the research community can help us. And I can't emphasize more the importance of systems thinking as well. This question is full of feedback loops, and it is hard to handle it in isolation. Thank you so much. Next slide. So there are three IDs we produced to frame this top-down approach, and you are welcome to contribute to them. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ali. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions today, but the slides have a lot of information for you all to take a look at, so please do that. And thank you very much for sharing it.
So we have 5 minutes?
Yeah. 5 minutes.
Perfect. So I should be able to cover in 5 minutes. Next slide. So basically, when I joined the IIB, one of the questions that came up during the IIB retreat is looking at what makes an IB workshop successful and how it is different from all the other venues where we make good discussion. And I took an activity, I did with the help of the past IIB workshop organizers, collected looking at last decades of workshops and trying to learn what are the good practices, what has worked well, and what guidance that we can give to the community as well on thinking how to use IB workshop as a venue to spark discussion. We updated our webpage and wiki with good information, so do check it out, as well as I wrote a blog a couple of months ago, and I just wanted to share that with the community as well. Next slide. So this is a very high level description of what a workshop is. It's basically a gathering of folks, experts from a broader internet community. Our aim is to reach out to people not just who participate in IETF, but much broader interest. And perhaps the IB workshop could be a very good vehicle to bring this outside expert opinions into some of our discussions. And we had topics related to, of course, the internet architecture, that's key, various protocol enhancements, standards, future direction, issues, bunch of different things. So you can look at our past workshops over the years as well to get an idea of what we have been talking about. Next slide. One good thing that key discussion was what do we consider as a success factor in a workshop. And since every workshop is very different, our goals of the workshops are different, we shouldn't really look at in a very quantitative terms on what is a good workshop. Instead, we should look at various different factors. Some of the factors are listed here is what kind of conversations happen. Were these conversations only possible in a workshop kind of setting, irrespective of like maybe a side meeting or in a BOF or in a public working group session? So that is the unique thing that a workshop offers. So only if that's so that's the key we wanted to target. It's very important that we scope the workshop well. The objectives are clear to everyone who is coming into the workshop. The organizations, the follow-up actions, and the long-term impact of that workshop, that's what much more key rather than the immediate effect in some of the cases. Next slide. Again, the outcomes could be very, very different. Some of the initial workshop discussions led to, in fact, some standards work, led to creation of some of the working groups. Some examples are listed there. Some led to creation of a research group. One workshop led to a much longer IIB program when we realized that the conversation needs to keep going. That's the e-impact one. Some of the workshops were one-off with the aim that we could provide better clarity and guidance to the community. And in some cases, it's just community engagement. And our aim is to bring in the outside help, outside experts, and share that with the rest of the IETF and the IRTF community. Next slide. And that's my last slide. The aim why I am in front of you is just to tell to the community that IB workshop is a tool that can be employed when you think that these kind of conversations are better suited for a IB workshop discussion. We just had a BOF and somebody did suggested that a workshop kind of setting could help in going deep down in some of the discussions that were discussed. So again, something to think about and just sharing with the rest of the community. And one thing that comes up is who decides an IB workshop. Usually IB is looking for a community for ideas. So reach out to any of the IB members, write to ib@ib.org and tell us that why you think this particular topic works well. And when we organize an IB workshop, it's not just the IB members. We have members from the community which joins us in the program committee, and some of which we are doing for our upcoming ones as well. So just wanted to share that because sometimes people don't have a clear idea on who is responsible for the workshop as well. Next slide. I think I have one more, which is just a message that we have an IIB open meeting tomorrow. We will be talking about 2 upcoming IIB workshops. So if it's interest, come join us in IIB open and perhaps we can have a longer discussion than my 5 minutes intro. Thank you.
Thanks, Dhruv. So with that, we have reached the end of our time. We don't have time for an open mic today. So if you have any questions, things you'd like to discuss with your fellow working group chairs, please take it to the mailing list. Also, if you have any suggested topics that you would like to see or people that you would like to see us bring in, like the lawyers who joined us today, then you can also send those to the mailing list or to the IESG at any point in time. With that, if you could please take your lunch garbage with you when you leave the room, that would be very helpful, and to prepare the room for the next session.